Welcome to the World Business and Executive Coach Summit. This is a fantastic opportunity to learn from some of the top coaches in the world. As a coach, I've had the privilege now of doing 2 sessions with WBECS that focus on my clients, 2 wonderful clients. One, Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford Motor Company. It was ranked 2014 number 3 greatest leader in the world in Fortune magazine, CEO of the Year in the United States. And then today, Dr. Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, one of the most important positions on earth, a person who's worked with all of the great leaders around the world, a person whose mission is the eradication of extreme poverty on earth. So I feel such a privilege to be able to work with both of these people, honored to be here, and I think you're going to find today just a great opportunity to learn from a fantastic leader.
Marshall.
I'd like to briefly introduce myself and then introduce my great friend, Dr. Jim Kim. We'll get started. My name is Marshall. I'm from a small town called Valley Station, Kentucky. Got an undergraduate degree in mathematical economics at a little engineering school, Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. Then I went on, got an MBA at Indiana University, PhD at UCLA Anderson School, and I was a college professor and dean when I was very, very young. Then for the last 40 years, I do 4 things. I travel around the world giving talks and teaching classes. I just went to my 100th country, Vietnam. That's great. 11 million frequent flyer miles. Then I coach executives, so I'm in the privilege to be the coach of the president of the World Bank here, Dr. Jim Kim, and Alan Mulally, our good friend, who was the CEO of Ford and Pfizer and Glaxo and the World Bank, and many, many wonderful people. And what I, as a coach, love about coaching is I learn so much. In theory, I'm supposed to teach my clients. In practice, I learn far, far more than I teach. Then the third thing I do is I write books and articles. So I've done 36 books, I think, and 3 popular books. And then I give everything away. I do videos and audios, put everything online, and now I'm in the process of a project called 100 Coaches, which I just love. And the genesis of the project is I just decided to basically adopt people, teach them all I know for free. And the only price is when they get old, they get to do the same thing. And I'm very happy that 14,000 people applied so far. And you've met a lot of these people.
Yeah,
wonderful,
absolutely.
Wonderful, good people, good-hearted people, smart people. So very, very honored. And today we're going to talk with my good friend, Dr. Jim Kim. A few conversation topics. One is a little bit about your history and your life. I'll say a little bit and then I'm going to hand it over to you. Then number 2 is a little bit about your journey as a leader. How you got to where you are, some of the things you've done. Then we're going to talk about coaching. We're going to talk about potentially the role of coaches in doing kind of like what I'm doing with you. Helping people in a pro bono way. Trying to make the world a little better. And I'm a great believer in the concept of this, so that's pretty much our topic. So
Great.
Well, let's get started. Brief introduction to my friend, Dr. Jim Kim. Well, in fact, I think I'm not going to do that. I don't have you introduce yourself.
Sure.
I think you can carry this ball.
Okay. My name is Jim Yong Kim. I'm currently the 12th president of the World Bank Group. Trained as a physician and anthropologist. I was born in 1959 in Korea, the Republic of Korea, at a time when it was one of the poorest countries in the world. And the great irony is that when I was born in Korea in 1959, the World Bank refused to give loans to Korea because it thought that Korea was such a hopeless country that it wouldn't be able to pay back even the lowest interest loans. It wasn't until I was about 4 years old that Korea got its first loan from the World Bank Group. I spent most of my life in some of the poorest countries, poorest communities in the world, in Haiti, in Peru, in Mexico, many countries in Africa. And the focus has been to provide health and education for the poorest, and also to do it in a way that made a point. And the point was that it was the nature of our responsibility as physicians and anthropologists and academics, but really as human beings, to think about the lives of the poorest, and then to continue to ask ourselves, well, what should we do, and what is to be done next? And so, as a physician, I could have stayed sort of in a clinic and caring for patients, but at some point I decided that the role for me would be to try to lead organizations and lead others so that we could have a bigger impact. And that's when I started becoming very interested in leadership. And about, it's almost a decade ago now, I met Marshall, and Marshall completely changed my life and completely changed the way I thought not only about leadership, but about how I could bring the lessons I learned from Marshall to large organizations. At first, it was Dartmouth College, where I was president for 3 years, but then now at the World Bank Group. And I think there was a great suspicion of leadership in leadership training at the World Bank Group, especially among the PhD economists who really run this place. You know, academics tend to have a deep suspicion about leadership. And when I was at Dartmouth, you know, I'll never forget, one of the professors told me when I talked about the importance of leadership for our students, he said, you know, we hate leadership. I said, what do you mean you hate leadership? He said, leadership suggests followership. And what we do as scholars is we teach young people not to follow anybody. And this was an exact quote from one of the professors. And so there's a lot of professors, you know, would-be professors or people who would be professors here at the World Bank. But I think that we've really turned the tide now, because the most important thing we've seen is we've seen people who are literally in trouble as leaders get a coach and then get better. And we've had some just remarkable cases where they went from having the worst ratings from the people who report to them to the best. So the culture here is changing. It takes time to change cultures like this, but I just can't tell you how much my life has been changed by having someone like Marshall constantly sort of bring me back to a place of humility and learning and understanding that no matter how good you think you are, no matter how much you think you've improved, there's always a long way to go.
There's always a long way to go for all of us.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I've tried to do is really have my clients talk to each other. I find that adds so much value, and a couple of wonderful people that I've coached over the years have also kind of pitched in and tried to help out the World Bank a little bit. That would be my good friend Alan Mulally and Fred Hassan. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be around these guys too? Well,
let's start with Alan. You know, Marshall, you took us to see Alan Mulally when he was still CEO of Ford, and I was just, I've never met a leader of that much commitment and vision and just excellence in terms of leading an organization. I'd never seen anyone, first of all, transform an organization as much as he transformed Ford, but then do it with not anger or toughness or, you know, sort of ruthlessness that you hear so much about. You know, the reason they got better is because there was a tough leader. It was through smiling. It was through caring about everyone. It was through being a person where, you know, when he walks through the halls, the janitors and the people who serve food, they all know him. He knows their names. It was a revolution that happened in Ford, but it was a revolution that was a mixture of warmth and compassion linked to just an absolute set of moral and ethical standards that everyone knew they could not violate. And so I came away from that thinking, oh my goodness, this is the greatest leader I've ever seen in action. I could never be that good, but maybe I can learn a few things.
Get better.
And so when Alan retired, we had to take the World Bank Group through a huge change exercise. And Alan came here. He was here for at least 3 days, I think, just meeting all the people and the little inputs. He would always say, "Well, Jim, you know, I think you're doing the right thing, and I think you know what you're doing, but just have you ever thought about this?" Yeah. And the things he told me were absolutely transformational. Fred Hassan, you know, an immigrant from Pakistan, who came and has turned around so many companies. I think the count is at least 5 or 6 companies that had major problems that he turned into major successes. And Fred just gave me such practical advice. Just he would say things to me, well, like, Jim, the reporting structure is as it is, but it's not the usual. Right. Now, you can do it if you like this way, but normally the reporting structures look like this. Right. And it just was so eye-opening. And so, at the level of just sort of how you approach leadership, but also very specific inputs. And because he had done so many turnarounds, the input from people like Alan and Fred are just invaluable because they've been there. And when you rise up to the top of an organization, often it's really hard to get good feedback. So it's lonely. And so to have Fred and Alan come in to give that kind of advice, also, charging exactly what you do, Marshall, which is zero, and spending so much time with my team, it's something that I will forever be grateful for.
Well, I think a lesson to the other coaches, hopefully listening to us right now, is don't be who you're not. I've never run a company before, never pretended to run a company. That's not who I am. On the other hand, I think you and a lot of my clients could benefit from, number one, learning from people who have these fantastic track records like Fred and Alan, who are just off the charts, fantastic records. And number two, just being around other people who are like a peer group that you can talk to. You've also been to 2 or 3 of my other dinners and things like that where I have with all my clients. I love doing that because, as you said, it's lonely at the top. You don't have 1,000 people you can share everything with. It's nice to be around other people who've been in important positions. As a coach, I don't know what it's like to be a CEO. On the other hand, they do. And it's nice to be around people who have different experiences and can help you and be on your side. And, the other thing I'd like to talk about for the coaches listening is that right now, the WBECS is working on something called the Ethical Coach Program. I love this concept. You love this concept. It's a winner concept. And the idea is really getting coaches to pitch in and try to do nonprofit work. I mean, as you mentioned, I don't charge you any money. I've never charged you any money and don't plan to start, right? And Alan doesn't charge you money and Fred doesn't charge you money and Mark Thompson doesn't charge you money and Sandy doesn't charge you money. And so we've run in.
For the coaches, I have to say, what Marshall says is, I refuse to lower my price even another $1. Of course.
That's right. I'm sticking with that price.
He's tough.
Right?
He's tough on us, man.
I'm not lowering that price.
He refused to lower the price.
No, I don't lower that price. That is what it is. Well, I love this concept of ethical coaching. Let me tell you why I think it's great for the coaches. And any kind of volunteer work is good. So I don't mean this in any way to demean any volunteer work, because I think anybody who does any volunteer work at all should be praised.
Sure.
The reality is, me licking stamps or doing minor tasks is really not the best use of my time as a volunteer. I'm not going to eradicate extreme poverty on earth. On the other hand, that's your job. And to me, if I feel like it can help you even just a tiny little bit, that's my contribution. And what I love about the whole idea of the Ethical Coach Program is really getting the coaches to help in a way you're using what your skills, your unique skills. You're leveraging your unique skills. And there's a lot of volunteer things I could do that were good, but they don't leverage my talents. Whereas to me, I've worked with you, the head of the Red Cross, our friend Francis Hesselbein, the head of the Girl Scouts, the head of the Mayo Clinic. I'm on and on. The USAID, Dr. Ross Shaw, just all kinds of people. And for me, it's been just a wonderful learning experience. And I've got to say, you mentioned change your life, totally changed my life. Because, and I'm going to say this from a selfish point of view, it makes me feel good about me. Because I feel like, making a difference. So, and the thing is that you've helped give my friends, Alan and Fred, they're mega successful people. They don't need status. They don't need money. They've got all that stuff, right? But you've also given them something, meaning. And you can't buy meaning. It's very, very important. It's very important. So maybe some suggestions you might have for the coaches in terms of, things they could do to make a positive difference.
Well, Marshall, I knew that coming into the World Bank Group that I was going to be walking uphill or climbing uphill a little bit and trying to convince them that coaching was important.
Right.
And, I guess one of the best lessons that I keep referring back to is, our mutual friend Atul Gawande, right?
Yes.
Atul Gawande wrote an article in the New Yorker about coaching. He said that one day he was just watching television and he heard that at the time Tiger Woods was the best golfer in the world, had a coach.
Of course.
And so he asked himself, well, gee, I'm a surgeon, but I haven't had anyone teach me anything about surgery since I finished my residency.
Right.
Maybe I could get a coach that would help me.
Right.
And so he got a senior surgeon to sit in the operating room and watch him. And the senior surgeon said, well, Atul, you're such a great surgeon. I'm sure there's nothing I can do to help. And Atul, of course, follows every single piece of data about his own surgical outcomes. And so the surgeon came in and he had a list of 15 things afterwards. He said, well, Atul, you're a great surgeon, you're skilled, but here's just 15 things that I've noticed. And Atul then got better. His numbers got better. And so he made the case that anybody can get better. And if the best people in the world at what they're doing are getting coaching, then everyone should. And so I've used that argument with my own teams. And so, Marcia, when you came early on, remember it was 5 years ago, in the first 2 or 3 months, you came in and met my whole team. And we began the conversation about coaching. And now everyone knows that I have a very specific approach with our senior people. We do an assessment every year. We do a full assessment, and I was actually the first World Bank Group president to also participate in the assessment. So I get my full assessment every year as well. Everyone gets it, and if you're doing poorly, I do with them exactly what Alan taught me to do. I go to them and I say, well, this is not a good assessment. Now, I want you to get better. I'm rooting for you. We're going to give you a coach. I really want you to get better, but this is not acceptable. You really have to work at it. And so, we had one leader who had just the worst assessment that anyone could imagine. It was just, off the charts bad. And then that person agreed to get a coach. And we started the coaching process, and the improvement was stunning. And so after 2 years, this person had the best assessment of any of our senior leaders. And so I use that example over and over and over again. And it's such a wonderful way. You don't have to worry about giving tough feedback, because you get tough feedback, but then we're going to give you every chance in the world to get better. And without question, it's the people who have the humility to listen and who have the humility to take a really hard look at themselves and how they interact with others and their own practices that not only get better, but over time turn out to be the greatest leaders. So we've really changed this culture, Marshall. We've changed this culture completely toward one in which we're not, it's not about sort of just assuming that you're good or assuming that you're bad. You're a good manager, bad manager. We don't think like that. We're trying to adopt the Carol Dweck's idea, the growth mindset, That anyone can get better. Anyone, and the most important ingredient to you getting better is for you to have the humility to listen to what people are telling you.
Now, also in terms of coaching with you, my good friend and fellow coach Mark Thompson is also, I think, pitching in. He's probably charging about the same fees I am. Great. Describe some of the things Mark has been doing too.
So Mark, he's a great coach, first of all, but the great value that Mark brings is first and foremost just who he is, just what kind of person he is. And everyone can just tell that this is a person with great sincerity, warmth. But he's also been in the financial business. So the fact that he's actually been in our business has been incredibly helpful. So Mark started off just coaching one of our most senior people, but now he's coaching the whole team.
It's great.
And bringing in other volunteer coaches. And your network, Marshall, has just so many fantastic people that we almost can pick and choose people who've had a very specific background to coach very specific people. And so Mark's just had a huge impact. But the other thing that we've done, and you've been so generous on this, is that when you bring some of your coaches together, and sometimes you bring your coaches together, when you bring your clients together, sometimes it's the clients who are CEOs, and sometimes it's the clients who are in the wings to become the next CEO.
Future CEOs, right.
And so I've sent my people to many of these events, and they always come back and say, wow, there's just nothing like that, because we're together and facing so many of the same problems, and there's no one else that can help us in quite the same way. But your CEO group, Marshall, I think I've been to at least 5 or 6 of them, going back now almost a decade, and it's not just that they're CEOs and they're facing some of the similar issues. It's their CEOs who've been coached by you. Right? So when we get together, we always start by commiserating over our first 360 feedback and how low we felt right at that moment. And so we use the same rules, right? When we get together with all the CEOs, we use the same rules that Marshall uses in coaching us, and which is that if you say anything defensive, a no, a but, or try to explain yourself, you have to put $20 on the table, right? And so when all of us are sitting together, we've raised thousands of dollars at some meetings, and it's the same rules. And we're always trying to either resist saying something like, yeah, but that's not what it really was. Right. But you have to put. So at some of these meetings, I got to the point that I would prepay. Right? I would put $100 on the table and say, okay, I'm going to object at least 5 times to this. But they're friends of mine now. We've reached out to them, and just sitting listening to their leadership experience is extremely valuable. I strongly recommend it to all leadership coaches to bring your clients together and
get over any kind of ego thing. Because you don't have to be the expert at everything. To me, I gain credibility when I say I'm not an expert on something. Because then people get the feeling, well, okay, when you do act like you know about something, you probably do. But you don't pretend to know about things you don't know. I'll talk a little bit about, on this nonprofit, my own journey.
Sure.
Because whatever I've done to help others, I've got back 10 times. Not once, 100 times maybe. First person I think major volunteer job was Dick Schubert, who was head of the Red Cross. Well, I got to work for the American Red Cross, a fantastic experience, got to learn what they were doing. More important, though, he introduced me to George Weber, who's head of the International Red Cross. I got to spend 9 days in Africa watching people starve to death. A picture of it's in my book, Triggers, and a picture of a woman kneeling down. I think you saw it, and she's measuring the arms of children, and if they're too small, they die, and if they're too big, they don't get food. And in the middle, they got food. It was just heart-wrenching. I got so much out of that experience, though, because I keep that picture every day. I look at that. It's a reminder, be grateful. Well, you can't buy that kind of experience. And if I hadn't been a volunteer, I would have never had that experience. So then I worked with Richard Schubert. I got to work with George Weber, head of the International Red Cross. Then I got to meet Frances Hesselbein, who you know. Give me your reactions to Frances Hesselbein.
Frances, just reading her life story and then meeting her. I mean, she's there. You meet her, and she seems like the kindest, warmest, most open person, and she is, of course. But my goodness, the way she's made difficult decisions, and boy, you do not want to take her on.
Oh no.
She knows what she's doing is something that's good for girls from every kind of background, and she's protecting them, she's helping them to grow, and so to have that much warmth and kindness and insight mixed with the steely toughness that she's had to have to defend her organization and to keep it going forward, it's just an absolute unique combination. I've never seen it before.
Well, she and Alan remind me a lot of each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2 ways. One, they're both the nicest people in the world. Heart of gold. Alan also say backbone of titanium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Heart of gold.
Both of them. Yeah.
Backbone of titanium.
Absolutely.
Alan is the sweetest guy in the world. You do the wrong thing, he won't get angry. He'll always say, well, you had a choice. And you
Right.
That's it.
That's it.
And if I think about my own journey through life, The volunteer work I've done has totally changed my life. If I had not done this volunteer work, I would have not met Frances Hesselbein. Frances Hesselbein introduced me to Peter Drucker, a volunteer on the Peter Drucker Foundation. I got to spend 50 days with Peter Drucker. I mean, what's that worth? I used something Peter Drucker taught me every day. I couldn't buy that. Well, I didn't have to buy it. Just because I made a donation, it was given to me. So if I look at the blessings I've had in life, the first 6 books I did were with Frances Hesselbein. First book I did was Richard Beckhardt, Frances Hesselbein, Peter Drucker, and me. Now, who was I? I can tell you, I was nobody compared to these people. Nobody. After the 6th book, guess what? One of them. I was one of them. Well, to me, just a fantastic blessing to be able to work with quality people. The other thing you mentioned are dinners together. One thing I like about it is just diversity of types of people.
Absolutely.
Now, one person, I coach in a kind of funny way as a volunteer, although not really for good deed doing, for somewhat selfish purposes, our friend David Chang. Now, David is one of the world's greatest chefs, and I'm kind of like a homeless guy, so we'll work for food. David's got me some pretty spectacular meals, and he's one of the top chefs in the world, of course, good friend of yours.
Well, you've had a great impact on David.
Well, he's a wonderful guy, a lot of fun.
Really great impact.
The reality is, though, it's fun.
Yeah.
And I like to have diversity. I don't want, if you have a bunch of just corporate CEOs around, no matter how nice they are, they tend to get a little competitive. Mine is bigger than yours, kind of deal. And when you have people from nonprofits, different types of life, maybe General Eric Shinseki, you've had a chance. I do volunteer work for the military too.
Right.
And had a chance to meet. You've met General Shinseki,
of course. Yes.
I had a chance to be work with him, work with admirals, and I got to fly on a fighter jet and do all this. I wouldn't get to do that stuff, and you couldn't buy it.
Right.
You couldn't buy it. Right. So to me, back to that MasterCard term, priceless. The benefits I've got from doing volunteer work for me, just selfishly, have been priceless. So I think I really want to encourage the coaches to do this for a variety of reasons, and one of them is learning too. If you just work in one type of an organization, you never know, is this specific to this organization or is this about human beings? You work with 50 different types of organizations and you start to see what is really unique to the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
This issue of providing leadership training to nonprofits.
Yes.
So the fact is that usually most nonprofits can't afford great leadership coaches, and so often, if they even think about leadership, the coaches they can afford are probably sort of just people in the area, and there's often a real suspicion and cynicism about coaching, which is too bad, because I tell you, so many of the nonprofits, the thing that I see that's most detrimental to their future is bad leadership.
Yes.
And Alan told the story about when he was at Boeing. It was just such a toxic environment, and people would say all the time, "Well, what is it? What is it about this you don't understand?" And Alan said that for a short time he even adopted those behaviors.
Right.
But then someone did exactly what he now does. They just came to him and said, "Alan, that's not working for us."
Right.
That kind of attitude. And I want you to get better. You got till Monday. Right? I'm rooting for you, but I'm not sure you can do it. And of course, Alan changed immediately. But that kind of toxic behavior is quite prevalent in many nonprofit organizations, because I think people get the sense that we're doing God's work. We're doing such good things for everybody that the way we talk to each other is not important.
Right.
And so let me just encourage all the leaders who are looking at this video. Please go out and help, because it's just as needed among nonprofit organizations as it is in for-profit organizations. For-profit organizations can afford Marshall and some of these others, but the nonprofits really cannot. But it's just as important, if not more important, because the conditions we face are more difficult. You need to be even more thoughtful about what your peers and what your direct reports are thinking about you, and constantly trying to get better. The holiness of the mission does not make you immune to bad behavior.
Dr. Jim, I totally agree with you on this one. I find, unfortunately, I've worked with leaders in nonprofits who sincerely love humanity and cannot stand human beings.
Right.
They love humanity in theory.
Right.
They love the theory of humanity.
Yeah.
They treat human beings like dirt.
Yeah.
And the glaring discrepancy between this love of humanity and this disdain for normal humans is just, very mind-boggling. And so I completely agree with you. And it's the other thing about nonprofits is it's good to be righteous. It's not good to be self-righteous. Mm-hmm. And I find sometimes the nonprofit leaders can kind of go too far.
Sure.
And that righteous turns into self-righteous, preachier, holier than thou, talking down. And the other thing I found in nonprofits is also, in a way, the leaders have a weapon that's even bigger than money. Mm-hmm. What is that weapon? Guilt. Mm-hmm. See, I worked with the head of the International Red Cross, and they're working on disasters, and people are dying out there. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, you can start hearing things like, what do you mean you need to go to sleep? Mm-hmm. How many people are going to die because you go to sleep? Yeah. Well, it is true.
It's true.
People are going to die.
Yeah.
You still are human, and you still need to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And if you don't go to sleep, you're not going to help anybody. On the other hand, just treating people because you have this good mission, that somehow now this excuses you from treating people with dignity like you should treat any people. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that happen. I'm sure you have more than I have in the nonprofit world.
Yeah. Well, Marshall, with your the MG100 group, you started this amazing virtuous cycle, because when you said, I'm going to give away everything, I mean, you're giving away all your materials, but you're also hosting them and paying for these lessons that are just invaluable to them, that they couldn't get in any other way. And what we're seeing here at the World Bank Group, we're directly benefiting from it, because now we're working with some of these coaches who we met through you, and now feel that part of their mission in paying it forward, you've given them this great blessing, and now they want to pass it on. But what I hope is that that this particular series that we're filming right now will turn into that a virtuous cycle where the outreach to nonprofits will continue to grow. I mean, I really hope that's what happens.
Well, the other thing is, and again, this sounds very strange, because I went into the idea of, the history of the project is, I went to a program with my friend Aisha Bursell, who you've met, wonderful woman, right? And she wrote a book, Design the Life You Love, and who are your heroes? And my heroes were people like you and Alan and Frances Hesselbein and great teachers who also were very generous people. You're a very generous person. You don't have to be here this weekend. You're donating your time too. So anyway, very nice, generous people. And then what happens is, she said, be more like them. So that gave me this inspiration to do this and to give back to these people. And the only price is they do the same thing.
Sure.
Let me give you the ultimate irony of this program. I'm the winner.
Well, Marshall, you'd done significant amount of pro bono work before. But then when you started working with me, what was really interesting is then you started working with Raj Shah, who was head of USAID.
Yeah.
And
who's going to be here tomorrow, by the way?
Oh, is he going to be here tomorrow?
Yeah, he's
great.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
So the fact that you got to look at two different huge development organizations was helpful to me. Yeah. You told me things that you'd learned working with Raj that just went off in my head. Yeah. My goodness, that's what's going on here. Yeah. Right? And now that you've developed this sort of practice, John Noseworthy from Mayo Clinic, and now George Daly, the Dean of Harvard Medical School, my classmate who is now going to be working with you. I mean, now you're developing an expertise on what it's like working for these kinds of organizations, that's incredibly helpful to it. And so maybe one of the things that can come out of this, just thought that came to my mind now, is that we can start developing some sort of packets and special sort of focused sessions for leaders of nonprofits. The first thing is that leaders of nonprofits have to come to the conclusion that they need help with leadership. Right? And so many of them think that it's just mission. As long as my mission is strong, as long as my commitment is there, that's all I need.
Right.
But in fact, that's just the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, two final things I'd like to discuss with you. The first one is, you've talked a lot about the positives of coaching, which is good. Also, you did mention this first feedback thing. If you've never been through it, it's a little tough. And again, you've been around my other clients. I think, I may be wrong, I think it's Doug. Doug, who's now the CEO of Walmart. You know what he said about my feedback session? He said, my first feedback session with Marshall Goldsmith, he said, I made a trip to the dentist to get a root canal operation. I feel like one of the better moments of my
So
he said it was so bad. Now, he was exaggerating. It wasn't that bad. But, nobody's dying. But you got to tell the group, it's not the easiest moment in the world.
Well, so one of the great moments, and I won't say who it was, but it was another nonprofit leader that I had suggested that to Marshall that he might work with him, and his initial response to Marshall was, well, Marshall, I just have to warn you that you're going to be talking to my direct reports, and you're going to have to encourage them to really say some negative things, because I think mostly they'll tell you good things.
Oh yeah, right.
And Marshall just started laughing. He started laughing, and of course his direct reports needed no prompting in telling. No. And I think part of it.
By the way, 32 medical doctors were on that list. 32 medical. Oh, they're only going to say good things. Hello, hello. What are you thinking?
So some of the reactions that you get, we go in knowing that Marshall's the greatest leadership coach on earth, but what happens is that you get this sense that, okay, so that was going on in my head, but I didn't think anyone else was picking it up.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You think, oh, come on. They didn't really. I mean, I know I was thinking that, but they couldn't possibly picked it up.
And they did.
So Marshall gives you a view of yourself that, on the one hand, he doesn't crush you. He gives you some of the positives, but he says, this is how people are seeing you, right? And all I'm here for is to help you be better, to help you get better. And Marshall is like the greatest example of the growth mindset. Marshall believes everyone can get better,
right.
But he also believes that you're not going to get better until you face the reality of how people see you in all its glory and all its horror. Yeah. And so that first session. It's sort of like I went to an extremely primitive place in trying to defend myself. I said things to Marshall like, well, but Marshall, I'm Asian American and you may not. And so then Marshall listed for me like the 100 Asian leaders that he coached over his lifetime. So I won't go there. Yeah, but Marshall, you see, I've been working to help the poor my whole life. And then he told me about Francis Hesselbein. So I didn't have that. And it was that at that point, when you're absolutely toothless, that the growing starts. Yeah. Right? And there's just I can't imagine how anyone could do it in that way, where they really bring you down to a point where you say, oh my goodness, I'm all my flaws are open to the world. Yeah. And then Marshall starts building you back up by saying, okay, now let's start. Here are the tools that you need to use, right, to get feedback, and really take the feedback, do it in a disciplined way, and ask people for help, get better. The method is just so brilliant. And if you think about all the great theoreticians in the world about human psyche and what it takes to be a balanced person who brings out the best in others. All the elements are there, right? And so I would and I hope some leaders of nonprofits watch this video. And what I would say is really seek out the people who can give you that experience. Right? And it's also what I tell every young person I know. I said, get some leadership training and start early. Don't think that leadership training is for people who are in positions of leadership, because leadership training will actually help you be a better team member. It's one of the great things about the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth that you and I both know so well, is that every single MBA student gets more than 20 team experiences. Right. And then they have team doctors that watch how you interact and give you that feedback. And I think it's why Tuck graduates do so well out there in the world. Yeah. And boy, as every time we bring new people into this organization, it would have been great if they all could have had team doctors or leadership coaches coming in. But that's okay, because we provide that once they get here as well as we can.
One final comment, and that's for all the coaches listening. Any words for them about coaching, working with nonprofits, any encouragement you would have for them?
Well, so what I would say is that I have watched coaches, and I have talked to coaches, not your coaches, Marshall, but coaches that now that we have so many who want coaching that we hire them. And a lot of coaches come in and want to convince us that they have a model of coaching, and the model often becomes far more important than the actual coaching process. The thing that you come with, Marshall, is that first 360, right? It's and for the people I've talked to who've gone through it, they say that it's really one of the most significant experiences of their adult lives. And so I would say to the coaches, really take your time, really take your time to ensure that you are really, really good at providing that 360. I think that's the seminal moment, because the path to improve, Marshall, I think if they just read your books and adopt the techniques that you've outlined, that they're going to have success. Right. But it's that first moment where you take the time to really understand how everyone else is seeing this person, that it's not you, it's not you with a special method that will cure everybody. Right. It's the extent to which you really understand the strengths and weaknesses of your client that's where improvement comes from, right? And my guess is that even leadership coaches can get better, right?
Oh, of course.
And for me, looking back, it was that moment that really made me a disciple, forever, to think, oh my goodness, how lucky am I to have somebody at this stage in my life, when I'm president of a university, come and just bring me to my knees in terms of having to look at myself, maybe for the first time in my adult life. And I didn't feel lucky right then, Marshall, as you know. I didn't feel lucky right then and the day after. But then, even after a couple of weeks, it just thought, I'm so fortunate that there's this person in complete confidentiality that will give it to me straight. And I think that that's really the start of any meaningful relationship between coach and client.
Great. Two final comments from me. One is I'd like to thank WBECS for having us do this talk. Yeah. Number two, though, is for really pushing this ethical coach idea, and for what I think is adding a lot of class to our whole profession. Really trying to get not just coaches, but the best coaches to do volunteer work, to help others. And I think that's just the best use of the coach's time, rather than try to be somebody you're not or play an insignificant role in a nonprofit. To really leverage your strength, I think, is wonderful. Second thing, I'd like to thank you. You're a very busy person. You're president of World Bank. You didn't have to do this. I really appreciate you taking the time and all the wonderful support you've given to me and also the wonderful support you've given to all those other coaches that I'm working with. So,
Marshall, thank you. But I mean, I'm so indebted to you. I mean, it's been almost a decade now that you've been coaching me for free. I don't make a single significant decision in my life without talking to you for a long time about it. And let me just say, for those the coaches who begin thinking about doing what you've done and giving back and coaching others, there is some. You may find some resistance, but I'd say send people the Atul Gawande article.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
And the Atul Gawande article was great for me to read it because I'd already gone down that path.
Yeah.
But I send this to a lot of people.
Yeah.
For people who say, well, coaching, does that really work?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the people who every single day their bottom line depends on whether or not leaders can lead. They understand coaching. But in the nonprofit world, I think that in many ways what nonprofits are trying to do is just as important, if not more important, than what the big companies are doing. And so even if they're not banging down your door to lead them, if you have friends, if you know people who are in the nonprofit world, just send them the Atul Gawande article and say, coaching's important and anyone can get better.
Yep.
And just the notion that anyone can get better, including me, might be the first and maybe most important step you take in actually being a better leader.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you.